What I want to talk about today is, and partly it will probably serve as a, revision of the material. It relates to the theme, I guess I'm developing into about politics and therapy, and I guess how they can contribute to each other. And it's about what I call emotional learning. It's the part of this work that people have got to feel the tools. Otherwise, the relationship between the material and what you're doing with it can become a bit dry, a bit cold, a bit arid. To me, it's a sort of historical accident that our field of work came out of medicine and attached to medicine. It could have come out of religion, or it could have come out of history, but I'm taking a very wide view of the development of human knowledge when I'm making those sort of statements. But it came out of medicine, and in medicine there's something that, in a sense, accuracy is everything. The accuracy of a diagnosis is everything. The accuracy and the effect of a treatment is sort of everything. It's precise, it's technical. And I feel if we're looking at people's psychological struggles, in a sense, struggle with their own heart, their own history, their own soul, in my view, that simply doesn't have the same sort of precision as medicine. My field increasingly moves towards medicine, towards a clear view that there is mental illness that has its categories. Now, without going into that extraordinarily difficult debate, some of us disagree with that, and there's a long history of those of us who disagree with that. Sachs wrote about the myth of mental illness. The humanists wrote about how you've got to take in the whole person. Fritz Perls took it so far that he was opposed to any interpreter or diagnosis, and famously dismissed those as mind-fucking and elephant shit. That we were there to help a client, patient, the person we're trying to help, get in touch with their own struggles without putting our labels on them. So these, in my view, continue to need to be fundamental debates in our field. So I'm going at it a bit today in terms of emotional learning, which is saying that what we have as tools, we don't have any categories of diagnosis at all. We have a set of tools that we believe can be very effective in helping people, and that they have a practicality and a theoretical depth, which we can always explain or develop. The pendulum or the life forces, we've got them so people can learn them, and then they can do things with them. But the fundamental point we want to get across, and we sort of say it in the ways we talk about how there needs to be a lot of practice with the tools, and there needs to be a lot of repetition in the teaching, and we don't apologize for that. At times, I strongly believe that what Pellin is, I've said this here other times, but I want to sort of establish it almost methodologically, that Pellin is more like a good art school or a good drama school than it is like a university course. In a university course, you have to fulfill the requirements, and the requirements are laid down and they're quite extensive. Really good, and if you fulfill the requirements, you get your degree, and the better you do in fulfilling your requirements, the higher degree you will get, the more you will get recognition for a really good degree at first. But in some fields of work, including law, not the same with medicine, not the same with engineering, but people often say, I got my degree, but I learned to do the job after I left. It's often a statement made. Yet I think we have a model in the really good, Joe would know more about this than me, the really good schools of creative writing in universities. I think they come more from our model. How good is the stuff you're writing? In an art school, how good are your paintings? How good is your performance? Which is different than, have you read all the books and passed all the exams? And are you fluent with all those ideas? Rather than an art school or a drama school, another way you could say an apprenticeship is, how good can you do the job? That comes through absolutely starkly, I guess, because I've had these ideas for years, right back at the beginning. That approach comes through starkly in my work with foster carers, because it's really clear, is this person a really good foster care? And I can tell you the ones that are really good, and I've said it here before, and I say it publicly very frequently. I mean, it's my policy. It's a policy statement. And I say it when I'm training foster carers, and I say it when I'm in meetings with managers. Foster carers do more significant work than social workers, counselors, or psychotherapists. And I can make that statement from the place of being each of those three. And when I make the statement, some social workers are annoyed at me, often the young ones, okay? There's not much controversy in the statement. Yeah, I can understand what he's saying. Yeah, sort of like that. So it's recognized that good foster here, learn emotionally. And they do the learning as something adding to that which they already know. If they're getting good training and they can claim their own confidence, which is a large statement, a large if, because they're often not very confident. And then they'll be somewhat passive in receiving outside information. But when they take the training, some of my training on listening, training on passive listening, training in memory links, training in life force, training in the pendulum, they're taking it in emotionally. They're linking it to kids they're working with. They're linking it to their own lives. They're not a group of people who expect to get quality training. While I make my statement, they're doing more significant work than all us professionals. The difference in status, recognition, and financial rewards is a huge gap. We're the privileged ones. And, if you go through the university professional process, you will have privilege. And the learning style there is very much you are required to know all these things. What we're saying with tools and repetition and practice is you got to take it in, grasp it, learn enough of it to use, know enough of it so you're not doing any harm. And we've got a whole system set up which is full of safety all over the place, including those of you who know it, chair work. We do chair work that's full of safety. The chair work that Fritz Perls did was not full of safety, but he was a superb practitioner. So he didn't cause harm, but he then taught people to do chair work, what was then called hot seat work. And this is where the emotional learning comes in, because there's a lack of it. It became a technique, and people could learn the technique. And to be quite frank, for a while it was disastrous, because he was trained by a man who'd been working in his chosen profession for 50 years. Fritz Perls was a superb practitioner. He could take all sorts of risks, but he held it together, and he knew, he could take those risks and be safe. Other people learned from him how to do that, which is opening people up to their emotional fears, putting it simply. But they didn't have the emotional learning to know that this could not be just a technique. That's not going to work. And, the Gestalt field has become much safer since I had those concerns many years ago, 50 years ago. I trained with him in 1969. I'm sorry if I can't get it not quite clear enough, because I'm struggling with it. It's sort of new. And that was coming from the medical model of you learn the technique. But to be quite frank, and Gestalt certainly went through a time of being very unsafe, being quite shoddy in some ways. And of course, in our, because the learning of the techniques was intellectual, it was a competition to be the person, as the Gestalt therapist, who could achieve the most dramatic breakthroughs, as they like to be called. You know, a whole lot of tears and breaking down, and getting in touch with deep trauma, deep fears, deep uncertainties. And it was a configuration that was sort of like that. It was sort of all performance life force. And Pearl's had some of that himself towards the end of his life. And even our word even fits. They were concerned with how the performance looked, which is the concern about me. How did I look did I do a good piece of hot seat work? Or that piece of hot seat work was brilliant, Peter. Or sort of words like this. And missing the boat, no. How did that piece of Gestalt work for the client? And that's a quite different question. And there was a lot of irresponsibility at a certain time in the humanistic movement, and you know, ended up getting a rather bad name. It's one of those places where the therapeutic world, well, our tool is the persona gap, which is the difference between my perception of myself and other people's perceptions of me. And that is also a learning, a whole concept of feedback and passive listening is emotional learning. The tools are quite simple. Then what we do with the tools ends up having within it enormous complexities. If you go in, and there's no question that the adjective is right and established. You know, who the great John Lewis was. It is how he, from the inside of his fears, learnt nonviolence. And from the inside of his fears, transcended fear. So he said he didn't have it anymore. He wasn't afraid anymore. I'm just awestruck. And it is in, you know, as I mentioned other times here, it is in, just look at him walking towards the bridge and towards the state troopers who were about to beat him up and seriously injure him. Yeah, he looks like a very quiet, perhaps rather shy college student walking onto campus on the first day of his freshman year. So the learning and the ambition of the Pellin tools is that we learn them in a way that they go into us deeply and deeply to the point where we feel them. So a tool that's hard to get across, the tool of authority, you know, which is essentially all about our work and the accumulation of our accomplishments and possessions and qualifications. Authority doesn't work unless you get it emotionally. You know, I am this. You can see it. You can see it when, well, to stay with that example, John Lewis walking towards the bridge, yeah, you can see the authority in him, the stature in him. Or, you know, a teenager who gets accepted at McDonald's, someone who gets accepted into grad school, someone who gets their book published. You know, that you can see the authority in someone. You can, it's physically in them. So you can see the authority has gone down on an emotional level. Or the reverse of that, someone, getting the 100th rejection slip for their novel, or someone who's been fired from their job, or all the people now who can't work because of coronavirus. So their authority is in jeopardy, and that absolutely has a emotional impact on them. Nobody doubts that. So what we want with the Pellin tools is this emotional learning process that involves a lot of practice and a lot of repetition and a lot of application. Looking at a situation, thinking, oh, you know, how did the pendulum fit in there? I guess if we go back to the bridge in Selma, Alabama, and look again and again, those people marching, you know, the first time they march, they think they're going to get beaten up, and they are. And then they have to flee, and then they're beaten up and injured and almost killed. I guess walking towards a bridge is some sort of enforced, fearful calm that, you know, trying to restrain a high of fear. And then when they're assaulted and turn and try to flee, and then are ridden down by baton wielding policemen and other policemen on horses, yeah, the calm breaks. The pendulum goes up to a huge high of panic. But just to take the first bit, when they're walking, I guess that's the power of the calm. Awesome. And of course, the second march, they're all walking, but, you know, by then the world's involved, the President of the United States involved, the whole country is shamed. And they know it's very unlikely. They're almost sure they're not going to be beaten up. They can't be completely sure, but they're, you know, pretty sure. And one step after another, after another, after another, no, they're not going to attack us with one. But they're still going to maintain that calm of the pendulum. You know, the eyes of the world are on the cop, but the eyes of the world are also on them. And so it's feeling what the calm is like, feeling what that control of our emotions when physically or emotionally, in this case politically, we're under attack. And finding, and that's where the tool needs to be felt and practiced and practiced and practiced. And of course, there's a parallel. Of course, that's what they did with their non-violence techniques. They practice them over and over again. But it was too much for most. I hadn't known this, even though I'm a student of that whole thing. But the reason that John Lewis was, because he was poor, a family of 10 sharecroppers. He came from that, and the other people were fairly well-off college kids. He was a college kid, but he was a poor. And he wasn't articulated as they were, and they're endlessly competitive, endless performance life force. But he was unanimously, almost naturally, elected leader, although a lot of other people wanted that job. But he was elected leader simply because there was no question he was the bravest. That was just a fact. No, he'd keep going when others had to give up. So it's learning, we call it the pendulum, in the nonviolent movement, they had other ways of talking about it. I don't know all the terminology. But essentially it's the same stuff, and you got to feel it. You got to feel what it's like. And the calm of the pendulum and feeling what it's like, we talk about the pendulum as a tool that increases the range of choices we have. And it is not, the calm of the pendulum is not just quiet, still tranquility. It's more than that. Because it's a place where we can have the fullness of our emotions, but we're in control of them. And again, this is sort of feeling the tools, applying them in different ways. In this, recently, I wanted to apply them to politics, see how they work. But I would maintain that John Lewis's last couple of speeches, when he was literally yelling in Congress, do what is right. He was a sick man then. But I would maintain with our tools that he was in a calm, although he was projecting this anger. He was yelling. He was accusing. But if you study it, and that again is the emotional learning, studying something deeply, you can't really appreciate Shakespeare if you're a technical student of it. You got to feel it. You got to get inside it. Or I'm not a musician, but musicians have to do that. Whether they're pop musicians or classical music, they've got to get inside it. In terms of what the whole Pellin approach is, we've got to get inside that material and feel it. And that's what we mean. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think these are really interesting thoughts you're raising, but quite kind of new, like you said. And it feels to me like it would be good to see if people have questions or examples.
Yeah, sure.
I could start the ball rolling. Yeah. I know I've talked about this before, but you helping me cast a new light on the way I talk about my experience of coming across the pendulum probably in 1974 and just being interested in it, not realizing it applied to my joyful, hellish life, alternating between overexcitement and terrible because I'm just trying to say it briefly because some people have heard this before, but because I heard it and taught it probably hundreds of times in the first few years, it really did take a couple of years before I said, oh, I go from compulsive high to compulsive low without pausing anywhere in the middle on the way down or up. And I didn't know that. And so it just really underscores the importance of the repetition and the applying, because I did see different things and I applied little bits and pieces. I just didn't realize the big picture thing, what applied to me in my case. And so I would say that my healing from using the pendulum only really began when I got what you're calling emotional learning in relation to myself.
I reckon that's just ordinary. I think this is speculative and audacious. I think that's what's like all over the place, okay? I would say that's what it's like. That was what it was like for them, and fairly, they're doing it. John Lewis anyway, he was on the first Freedom Bus. And they're going through the motions. But I think it's almost sometime down the line, it's, oh, that's what nonviolence is about. Even they've been doing it because they've got this huge commitment and they're surrounded by, massive support, sense of community, family, sisterhood, brotherhood, all of that's there. So they're going through it. But I think it's sort of sometime down the line, oh, that's what we're doing.
I think that's really right.
I would say that happens to scientists, and this is the bit I don't know. I'm just speculating. They go through something, and I think, oh, now I've got it. And I think that's inside, because there's a huge literature about it. We know that's the case with religious learning and religious teaching and leaders. You start on a path, but you almost don't know the path you're on until you're 5 miles down the road. I think it's like that.
I was going to say, I think that's right, because you can see the same process in 12-step programs, that you learn the different tools, the slogans, and the using the literature, and they're kind of piecemeal, and then you get to that stage that you're calling emotional learning, where you start getting it inside you. But what I was going to say when you said you think it's just ordinary is, yes, but it doesn't happen unless you do that, facing the tools, learning the tools, repeating the tools, keeping it to Pellin now. It doesn't happen without that. And as you know, Peter, I've spent, when I've been connected with you during the last 40 years, I said, Peter, how are we going to get that repetition that we had in those early days when we all had longer time in workshops? Because I knew it couldn't just be me that wouldn't have benefited if I'd come along later. Yes, there's the repetition in the courses that we had in London that I was only able to do 1 year of. It'd be interesting to hear what Jo thinks about this, because she did the many courses. But that has been my major concern, because I knew that I wouldn't have got better without the using the tools till I really had absorbed them. Did you want to say something, Stacey?
Well, I just remember that in the civil rights movement, they were in their Sunday best, and they marched with suit and ties, and I think that reminded them to be professional and to be good Christians, to turn the other cheek, and to be professional, not to act out. When you're dressed up, you tend to act your best.
Yeah, because it's different. But in England, kids who go to school wear uniforms, okay? It's a very different thing than in America. But yeah. Cease.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that because I've been involved in a lot of sit-ins, and not to the extent that you're talking about with John Lewis, but there were police there where we, did I already tell you about this, where we did
Doesn't
sit-in?
matter. Repetitions are great.
Okay, there was a bank, PNC Bank, that was funding mountaintop removal. And our Quaker group along the Eastern Seaboard, we developed a strategy of doing sit-ins this wasn't the only strategy, there were lots of other things going on too. But one of them was a sit-in. And so we practiced sit-ins before we went in, and practiced staying calm, deep breathing, praying, all that. And we went over that many times. And there were youth involved. There were people from 13 up to 80 in these groups. And the youth were really great. And we practiced, somebody would be the policeman and someone would be the bank manager and all these kind of things that they played the roles of. Oh my God. But being in that situation for the first time in an actual situation, in an actual bank, I know my heart was going like 100 miles an hour. But everybody was sitting, everybody was praying. We didn't sing, but actually they had music on in the bank. But I was so, well, this is the first time in a big bank. We did some small banks too. I was scared out of my mind, but I just stayed with it since everybody else was there and the leaders were saying it was okay. You know, the police said they were going to bring in, the bank said they were going to bring in the police. But the leader said, they'll give you 2 warnings. And the 3rd warning, they're bringing in the police. So we did the 2 warnings, and then we left. And it was very interesting. We sang "We Shall Overcome" as we were leaving, and people who were bank customers joined our line out of that bank. It was amazing. Once we told some of the people in the bank at another place here in Tampa, we didn't want to sit because it was on the floor, but we did a stand-in. And my granddaughter was the leader of that group. People came in and they asked what we were doing, and when we showed them what had happened with mountaintop removal, they were very upset. And they went up to the bank tellers and started telling them they weren't gonna. They were so upset with them. So it was really, you felt like you were part of this growing initiative, and that there were people on your side. We did leave that one before the police came in, but the police came when we were outside. And once we explained to them what we were doing and showed them how carbon hooked up with oxygen and was heavy and would drop down, they were like, oh, I get it, you go, you know. They were on our side. So
explain a bit what mountaintop removal is.
Oh, okay. Well, mountaintop removal is where they blow the top off of a mountain, about the top third. And it's a different way of mining.
Coal? Is it coal?
Coal. Yeah, it's coal. They come in and bring huge devices that they just scoop out the coal. So
they literally blow the top off the mountain.
About a third of the mountain. They blow it off, and it rumbles down the side of the mountain, killing whatever animals are there. It strips, you know, that whole, it can't be used anymore for animals. Supposedly they fix it, but they don't. They just scatter some dirt off the top. You can't bring back half of a mountain and put it back on top. That's not possible. So it's a real destruction of the mountains. It was, actually I went and saw it in person with the youth group, it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. It was like, you got this feeling how the earth is so precious and somebody has killed it. And it wasn't just that mountain that we were looking at. We went out and looked, the whole vista was mountains that had the tops blown off of them. Just went on forever. And it was that eventually that company did stop investing in mountaintop removal. But there were lots of things behind the scenes. Let me just tell you one more little story about this. That's such a nice story. Also, people would go in, we would become shareholders and go into the meetings and stand up. I didn't do that, but some other people did. But they were up in Pennsylvania was their headquarters. Now, we had a pretty good group in Tampa that was very interested in this. The PNC Bank did not realize there was a big group in Tampa, and they decided to hold their shareholders meeting in Tampa at a big bank. So we were there outside doing our march, and Tampa Bay Business Weekly, which is a very conservative paper, was there and did a story about us that went nationwide. Of these children, these 6 and 7-year-old children marching with this. And the bank finally realized they couldn't run from us anymore. That there was too much. There was a whole thing up and down the seaboard, eastern seaboard, like 30 different actions right before that. So it's a monumental effort, just like the civil rights, and that was one bank out of many who do this, but I overcame my fear. That's the point I'm trying to make here, that I overcame my fear, and by the end, it was like a snap. I just, it felt so easy, but it was, a lot of people didn't want to do it what I didn't want to, but my friend who's a teacher said she was going to go in. And I said, if my friend who's a teacher can go in and risk her job, I can do that. And so there was this movement that we could support each other. So I think that's all part of it. There, like with John Lewis, there was a whole group going across that bridge. Yep. And it really does take a group, and it does take practice to overcome that fear, but we were able to calm ourselves, pray, sing. We did a lot of singing, and all of those things had a calming effect. So, I mean, I'm just amplifying what you're saying, Peter, that the power of prayer inside a bank is pretty darn powerful. When people, you're not a threat to anybody, you're just sitting there, and people start asking questions, and it's very powerful. Whether you pray or sit in silence, the idea is you're calm, you're not hurting anybody. So I really appreciate what you're saying about John Lewis in that thing. He had that calm manner. He wasn't, I mean, he did get excited sometimes, I'm not saying that, but having that calmness is more attractive to other people, to involve them in some kind of movement as well, to know that there's calm people there. So I just couldn't help thinking about that when you were talking. It was a breakthrough in my life as far as being able to do other things that were difficult. So it was a really important moment for me.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And we've got another one now. Wall of Mums in Portland, Oregon. I mean, it's the same tradition. And, it's increasingly becoming women who are involved in this and women who are sharing. Women who are leading it. That's another change.
Just unmute yourself, Joe.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm thinking about going to demos and how they can be situations of very strong emotions, including fear, but including elation and including revulsion at the tactics of some of the groups you don't agree with on it. And I'm thinking one of the ways maybe one can keep one's pendulum in a good place is by contributing in an embodied way to the day, not only dressing in your best clothes, but dressing in appropriate clothes. So on a women's demonstration, dressing in purple, white and green to emphasize the history of the movement. I'm thinking about painting your own placard with your own words. So it's not just one you're given, but it's your statement. I'm thinking about being a steward, because there you are putting your body at the service of this demo working. So it's just a comment that maybe what we do with our bodies in a very organic, felt way can enable the demo to be a transformative experience, actually, not just a good one.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think because when you think of people holding hands, you know, how important that can be and how important the singing can be. And I just come in, you know, they're almost examples of the pendulum. You know, if I'm holding your hand, I bring my pendulum down a little bit from, you know, that place of either, you know, a high of fear or a high of unrealistic hope. But, you know, if I'm holding your hand, you know, I'm, you know, in a way it's common sense, it's that particular tool, but I'm centering myself. Cynthia, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm struggling a bit with my own pendulum right now. I have to just to admit I've been struggling with it since yesterday. I think everything's finally starting to break, and finding out that that they were coming into, that the federal government was coming into Chicago, just really upset me. But that may be first stall, because I think that, anyways. But one of the things I was thinking, even this, I was thinking my own training as a lawyer, which, you know, they didn't, when you talk about emotionally, now, I was at one of the schools that were a little bit more practical focused, but rather than, you know, in the Ivy League schools or anything. But one of the things I remember being taught was, we're not teaching you the law, we're teaching you how to think like a lawyer. And that was what it was, and that was what it's about. You know, that reminded me of that. And I'm still, it's funny because I still do think like the thing that was upsetting me about Portland and Chicago, I mean, aside from just the sheer fear of federal troops coming in, I mean, it's not going to, probably wouldn't come to my town, but it's close enough. I mean, we're sort of in the sphere of influence of Chicago. I mean, it's not like we're, you know, I mean, there's like 3 towns, and Bourbonnais, which is the north town, says, oh, we're a suburb of Chicago, and Kankakee says we're not a suburb of anyone, even though the 3 towns are near each other. But you know, on you know, just that sheer emotional, but then there's the anger, and part of it's that the lawyer training, because one of the things that's frightening me about this whole thing is that in Portland, the feds came in without the consent of the governor and without the consent of the mayor, and actually the governor and the mayor were fighting it. But I think they may have negotiated, because there is some bad violence going on right there in Chicago, I guess. But and they're not coming in to pull the protest. They are coming in because of violence and stuff. So, but I guess they're negotiating, and all the lawyers. So that calms me a bit, because all the lawyers, you know, Governor Pritzker is, you know, they're filing their lawsuits. The senators in Congress trying, but it scares me because I know what a threat to the Constitution that is. You know, the whole, you know, dual sovereignty, where the states are their own government. I mean, and that yes, federal can trump them in some ways, but but the, you know, the federal government coming in unasked by the governor is alarming. I mean, it's very alarming. But anyways, on that note, but I was thinking though, as a lawyer, that was also part of the training too, was finding the calm. I mean, when I was a divorce lawyer, you know, that was the biggest thing. Trying to get through the divorce, it was all about calming your client down, because until your client was calm, you were never going to get anything done. You know, it
This
just
is
wasn't going to happen.
this is one of those
I'm
times
sorry.
where I've got to say to you, stop talking about me.
Oh gosh, no, everybody.
I'm the client who
You
you
know,
could not calm me
everybody.
down.
Everybody. I mean, you know,
My experience of divorce is numerous and very, very sad.
oh.
So I appreciate you using those examples. I do.
But
Yeah.
but also some of the power of emotional learning. I mean, I haven't practiced law for over 7 years now. I don't intend to ever go back. I mean, I haven't kept my license up. But I still think, even when I do astrology, I think in terms of, and I just realized, you know, there's a thing for legal writing: issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. What's the issue? What's the rule? Analysis, you know, how do you analyze, and then you make your prediction, or you make your conclusion, or if you're doing for a judge, you make your argument. And I think I do that. I just realized I do that as an astrologer too. I'm like, okay, what's my issue? What's the rules?
Okay.
And then go. And I was just thinking about how powerful that is, and how quickly I can, even when I'm really super upset, I can like sort of switch into lawyer mode, which doesn't make me the most pleasant to be with, but I can it still happens sometimes, even without me thinking about it. And I was thinking about the power of emotional learning, and that. And sorry, just thought of that as an example. I'll finish
No,
now.
thank you. I think I would imagine, let me ask you this question. I would imagine when a lawyer is working really well, they've got an emotional connection to the law. They've got all this is speculation on my part. They've got all the technical stuff. I'm not, you know, denying that. They've got to be accurate, because the law is the law. There aren't any laws in the psychotherapy world in the same way. But I would imagine that when a lawyer is really on top of their game, they're feeling it. Is that the case? On some level. You got to press the button.
I'm sorry, I forgot. I just, anyways, yes and no. I mean, there's a little bit of, you know, part of the training is that you need to be able to argue both sides of an issue just as passionately. And even when you're representing the client, you have to know the other side. And a good lawyer can switch from one argument to the other. But what they are passionate, I think, about, you know, and that's an example of having to be in the calm. I mean, if you lose the calm, which I have, you know, and that's ever hard, you can't be effective. I mean, you can be passionate and intense, but once you're not calm anymore, it doesn't go anywhere. But what lawyers are passionate about, and I remember this when I was working for I wasn't even in law school yet. I was actually, this is when I was student teaching, and I was working for a family lawyer. And you know, some of his clients were really nasty people. I mean, most people going through divorce are, you know, most people are just people going through a rough time. I had another mentor say, you know, in criminal lawyers see the worst of people at their best, and divorce lawyers see the best of people at their worst. But there were some really nasty people he was representing, and I said to him, I asked, how can you represent somebody who's doing these nasty things? And he says, because everybody deserves to have somebody represent him and represent them, and that's so they're passionate about the system and their role as officers of the court in that system. So.
Stacy, do you want to come in?
No.
Okay.
I have no thought.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Nikki.
Hi.
Hi.
Just a little story. A few minutes ago or earlier, I was remembering somebody telling me about back in the days when we had Greenham Common here, which was a nuclear missile base, and just loads and loads of women used to go. Don't know why it was women. Anyway, this person's mother went, and of course everybody else went there and was camping, and they're all covered in mud and it's all rainy and muddy and they're just really scruffy. But this middle class dressed up woman with her coiffed hair and her pearls, and she would take her cushion and a flask of tea, and she sat in, apparently there was like, you have to go through the fence and then there's the roadway where they're actually bringing in the, you know, these massive trailer things with nuclear missiles on, and she would sit there on her cushion arranging her skirts, and of course everybody else was sitting there because it was about trying to block the path, and the police would come and do their job of lifting people up one at a time and dragging them away to the fence to come back and lift someone else while they ran back again. And she said nobody touched her mother, no copper touched her mother, and she just sat there like the Queen, sitting on her cushion with this massive tire carrying the nuclear missile inching its way past her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the calm of the pendulum, I think.
Yeah.
Sitting there while a nuclear missile is
I think she was
alongside the road by,
well, no, inching past her, literally massive wheels. But and you say calm of the pendulum, so I happen to know this woman was quite a bad narcissist. So maybe she was just sitting there in her performance life force, you know, and just not affected by anything.
Well, that's one of the things that we'll be looking at, and I'm writing a series of Facebooks on John Lewis and pendulum and politics, and you know there is no doubt that. Anyway, coming in on your point, Nikki, that it was her performance life force that enabled her to sit there, right? And just in terms of exploring, I guess using the example of John Lewis as a way of exploring the Pellin material, not Pellin material explaining John Lewis. And that's a terribly important point to me, and terribly important point for me in this field of work. It's something when we come in from a relatively recent branch of human knowledge, I mean, to use that example in another way, compared to physical medicine, compared even to science, compared to religion. I mean, the psychotherapy, arts and sciences, we're kids, we're in this very early stage. And from that place, I mentioned Kazantzakis, we come to sort of adolescence. I'm sorry to go on about this, but it's a very important point for me in terms of Pellin. We're not using Pellin to explain John Lewis. We're looking at John Lewis as a way of increasing our understanding of our tools. It's quite a different approach. And I think it gives us a necessary, almost scientific modesty, the way science is modest in a way. Someone went to the one of those top American institutes of science. This years ago I heard it, you know, these are the world's top scientists all meeting. And the reporter, it was a big one, I think it was a program by a man called Edward R. Murrow, who was a giant of television journalism in another day and age. He said he has never heard so many people say, "I don't know." You know, these are sort of top science. In my field of work, we don't get that enough. You know, I've got the latest thing and it's hand-waving therapy. So, you know, everyone's got to know about hand-waving therapy rather than, "I don't know." So that's a different approach. You know, Freud analyzing Leonardo da Vinci and explaining Leonardo da Vinci from a Freudian point of view, and in a sense reducing Leonardo to Freudian terms. To me, there's just something really wrong about that. Anyway.
I was just going to say that using the person to deepen our understanding of Pellin tools is so much more heart-centered.
Yeah, it is. Yep. Anyway, my point of view about coming back to Nikki's Lady in the Pearls and her skirt and folding chair, I can visualize it. And so the nuclear missile going in. Yeah, because while John Lewis's heart was huge, he came from the performance life force. That's my point of view. And using him to understand how the performance life force is this sort of force where we do come first. You know, I am this sort of political presence. And within performance life force, we have certainty. Like, you can almost feel the certainty of the lady alongside the nuclear missile. In the caring life force, we don't have certainty. We have doubts. Cynthia.
Sorry, I was thinking a little bit as I was talking about like what actually did make, in the field I was in. I mean, I was in family law, which is different from a lot of the other fields. But I think one of the things that really made the good ones, and they were the ones I would love to work with, and the ones who I would refer people to if it was something I couldn't handle, were those who had a very strong caring life force, but who could sort of, I don't know how to put it, but can sort of, and I don't know if this has anything to do with Pellin, but you could sort of transmute your caring life force and sort of calm things down into the material life force, and who had enough performance life force to do what was needed, but actually much lower performance life force, because the clients the lawyers I would never refer people to, and I hated working against, were the ones who were all performance life force.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think that's a particular use of the tools. And in politics, I almost use the same thing. And yeah, I'm sorry to keep harping on the travails of my life, but yeah, I'm an expert on good divorce lawyers and bad divorce lawyers, sadly. And I've had some terrific divorce lawyers. And they have that, what I call a sliver of caring life force, that you feel it. And, you know, it's all performance life force and material life force, and whether it's money or custody. But they got enough caring life force to connect and also to be accurate. Because one of the things we say about the caring life force, it is a source of accuracy about people. People in the performance life force will get people wrong. People in the caring life force have an access to, and again, it's emotional learning, because you know, it's knowing those parts of ourselves really well. But and in a way, it's not a mystery, because in the caring life force, we can put ourselves in someone else's shoes, and that gives us a chance to be more accurate about them. In the performance life force, we almost couldn't bear to put ourselves in someone's shoes. the combination works, and I feel John Lewis had both in such sort of vividness. You know, he had certainly had enough material life force to help get legislation through Congress, you know, turn out a book, then turn out 3 volumes of a graphic novel. So the world I don't know, I'm too old, you know. And yet, everything that's coming in about him, everyone's talking how great his heart was, yes. But it's performance life force that got him on the bus and got him beaten up on the bridge and then over the bridge the second time. You know, good performance life force is that belief in ourselves. That's what it is, total belief in ourselves. So
and the ability, sorry.
No, go on.
And the ability to take risks. So
Yes,
to those examples.
Yeah. Shelley, do you want to comment at all? And hi.
Hi. Well, I'm trying to decide because I have 2 thoughts. One is, you know, I give workshops, and I had prepared for a 2-hour workshop in the city of Simi Valley, which is, if you know about the city of Simi Valley, it's where a lot of police officers live. It's very conservative. But I give talks for these companies, and I was all set up to do it. At the time, I didn't realize it was the day after the 2016 election. So there we were, my husband and I, and he started looking on his phone and going, oh my God, this isn't looking good. And I'm like, what? And I couldn't believe it. We just felt worse and worse. That whole night was so bad, and I couldn't sleep. I just felt terrible, sorrow. And I didn't know what to do. And I said to my husband, what do I do? I can't do the talk. He said, Shelley, just be a professional.
Yeah.
So whether I put on the suit or not, I said, okay, I guess I have to just be a professional. And with 1 hour sleep, I drove to Simi Valley and gave a 2-hour talk and got a very good reception. Thank God no one brought up, you know who, winning. Thank God, because I might have fallen apart, right? I might have just broke down, but I did it, and I got back in my car and went home and then felt sad again. But it was definitely like a performance thing at that point in my life.
That's performance life force.
Yeah.
And you get it. Yeah, absolutely performance life force.
Oh.
I don't think I could have done it.
Yeah, I just couldn't cancel.
Yeah. And that's what, you know, and your husband right, because that's what actors say. You know, it's a tradition, and their field is sort of all performance life force, and you know this, your background.
The show must go on.
Exactly, the show must go on.
And that's what happened.
There's even a song about it, isn't there?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Peter, I just had a thought that I thought, oh, what were the tools we were going to talk about today? And I think we've brought in tools in a very rich way, but I just wondered if you did want to refer to contribution from hurt and transparency in relation to emotional learning before we had to stop.
Well, both. Thank you.
Is there somebody unmuted? Because there's noise in the background. Stacey, I'm going to mute you. There we go. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Peter.
Well, both, you know, contribution from hurt and transparency. And thanks for bringing them up, Mary. Terrific question. They are sort of, if the emotional learning is not there, well, to be quite frank, they end up being phony. You know, people who talk about transparency a lot and use the word often aren't. You know, we are a transparent organization, and you know, after a time you get a sense of, come on, guys, protest too much. Yeah, so real transparency is, well, it's emotional. I mean, immediately I said it. I sort of went, you know, when I, made my silly joke to Cynthia, stop talking about me because of all my divorces. Shouldn't have said that. I mean, emotional learning, we have the sort of uncertainty that comes with a caring life. And transparency has a very limited application in politics. Because inside Pellin training, this is sort of another place, but, we train people into don't be transparent with someone who doesn't have very much therapeutic goodwill, because they will not be able to resist the temptation to use the transparency against you. But transparency is a very particular thing, and again, you feel that within AA, within Al-Anon, people are sort of careful about how they use it, and it's got a very limited applicability in politics, because by definition, that is a field where you are running against people who have had any goodwill towards you, particularly if you're good. If you're a really good politician, the opposition is going to hate you, so to be transparent with them is a fool's game. So that is the emotional learning of also making accurate judgments. Because the superb politicians, whether it's FDR or Winston Churchill or Barack Obama, Dr. King, they know how to use transparency. They'll place a bit of transparency in there. But FDR certainly never talked about what it's like to be president of the United States from a wheelchair and as a cripple. So transparency, I think we need the emotional learning, but I think we also need the emotional knowledge, I'd say, there to use it well. And transparency is to be, if it's real, it's a little bit shaky at times. This is who I am and I'm sharing it with you. Incredibly powerful today. Women in Oregon who are so scared for their kids, in particular, both their boys and girls, both their sons and daughters, that they're going to go out and say, yeah, feds are here, mums are here, feds stay clear. There's a lot of, I want to be careful how to talk about this, because I'm white, elderly, privileged, all of that. But the contribution from hurt by mums who've lost their sons to police bullets, and mums who are afraid they're going to lose their sons to police bullets. I mean, that's contribution from hurt that's full of the words are inadequate, but full of emotions. And when you think, if we take, and I do like to play with, one of the ways to get the tools and get the practice and get the repetition Mary talks about is sort of play with them. But if you take it as a very, very wide exercise in the pendulum, you know, America's society full of rage and huge pendulum swings over the issue of race, over the issue of lynchings. And these few people come in and say, we are going to practice non-violence because there was this guy in India who did something with non-violence. I mean, that is there any other example in history of an education in the need for the calm of the pendulum? Because, you know, it doesn't matter what happens, we are going to be calm. Extraordinary when you think of it that way, because you could, right, you know, America in a way wouldn't necessarily be seen as a country that would take to a philosophy of nonviolence. And it's almost, it's nowhere in American history. And these guys brought it in. So, and I guess there's also something, and this is the emotional learning, because they came in with emotional learning, and obviously, just as it is happening now, that something is deeply touching people, you know, they were able to do something that was deeply touching, and they're still touching us now. Do you want to add anything before we do our ending locations, Mary?
No, I'm sorry. I'm fine, thank you. No.
Okay.
Add a little bit of history there.
Yeah, please.
Martin Luther King, as a Quaker, Quakers have a long history of nonviolent action. But Bayard Rustin was a Quaker who was working with Martin Luther King. And he actually was the one who went to India and studied with Gandhi, and then brought that back to King and had to do a little bit of talking with him about that whole experience. And King realized that that was the way to go. So, so it's wonderful how all these international strands are can pull together and create, you know, these significant political change. And I think it's I don't know where I'm going with that exactly, but it's nice to feel like it's not dependent on one person or another. It's this whole group of people working together and who all have a similar idea. Anyway, that's all.
No, I appreciate bringing that up, because I was sort of thinking about that when I was making that big, you know, example of the pendulum. And I think it would be arguable. Someone like John Meacham, I reckon, would argue that the nonviolent civil rights movement would not have been possible without the tradition of the Quakers, which goes back a very long way and was very influential. That, I don't, almost the historical links there. So there are all these, there's all these people saying, you know, we got to be centered, we got to be calm, otherwise we'll be too hurtful to each other. And I think the way in different places that Quakers sort of contained American violence, American tendency to violence. No, I think there's a clear link. Thank you. Thanks, Cease. Okay, ending up. I'm Peter, and I'm in King's Lynn in England. Do you want to go next, Shelley?
Hi, I'm Shelley in Los Angeles, California, and I appreciate listening to all the information, and I learned a lot today. Like, I didn't know about mountaintops, and I didn't realize how the Quakers influenced the civil rights. It's quite amazing. And I'm just happy to be a part of this and understand more and more. Thank you.
Thanks. Nikki?
Hi, I'm Nikki in Wimbledon, England. And yeah, just very interesting. Thank you.
Cease?
Cease in Tampa, Florida. And I just need to practice more being aware of my pendulum when I'm in personal interactions sometimes. It's much better when I'm in a group versus when I'm with somebody who's kind of activating that swing in my, so this is a good reminder to keep focus on that in those situations.
Okay. Stacy?
It looks like she's been going in and out. I think her internet connection's wobbly today.
Okay, Cynthia?
I'm Cynthia. I'm in Kankakee, and thanks everybody. This is pretty helpful today.
Okay, Joe?
I'm Joe in Yorkshire, England. I really value speaking to people from other countries. I think it's great that we have this mix. And I'm thinking how much we need a bit of therapeutic education before we go on demonstrations. You know, actually, almost there needs to be a demo training school.
Thank you. Mary? We're ending?
I'm Mary in Rosarito Beach, Mexico, and Vic did email to say he was sorry he couldn't make it today, and he'll see everyone soon.
Okay. Well, it's Wednesday and it's the forum, and Sunday will be the next one.
I'm just trying to remember what the topic was, because I did announce it. Let me see if I can. Do you remember, Peter? I think it's good to know in advance, don't you? Oh, here it is. Sunday is the political implications of the therapeutic tools of the life forces.
Yep.
Which we kind of touched on today.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.